Coming up on today's episode of Real Talk Rentals, what constitutes an emergency in property management? We're going to tell you. Welcome back to Real Talk Rentals, a podcast brought to you by OnQ Property Management. We're here to give you the inside scoop on owning a residential rental property. My name's Ben. I'm your host. With me, as always, my co-host, Mr. Eric Dixon, go-to expert on all things rental property and real estate out here in Arizona. And in this episode, we're going to talk about something that no one likes to hear about, but happens all the time, and that is emergencies. When things go wrong, what constitutes an emergency, what you should expect from your property management company in an emergency, and what your company should be doing for you.
Yeah.
So let's talk about when we hear emergencies around the office here. In general, I feel like that involves the maintenance department. You're thinking of maintenance emergencies. So maybe we start there and kind of walk through what is an emergency when it comes in the world of property management.
Oh yeah. So the even on our emergency line, I think of listening to it, and it's like, if this is the emergency, go to this option, and it lists some of the major ones, right?
Right.
Whether it's, and a lot of those are maintenance related, whether it's AC is out in the summer is probably the most common one in Arizona.
Yeah.
They're all the way from sewer backups to trees falling on the house to, all sorts of stuff, right? Ironically, so, Ben, you and I went over this yesterday, like, hey, this is kind of the topics, be thinking about it, that sort of thing. Last night, I get an emergency request.
From one of your properties?
From one of my properties. And that property has a pool, but a text message, went to maintenance, and they sent it to me and said, hey, it's flooded like 4 inches. And I'm thinking like pipe burst, something, pool equipment's going crazy. And the tenant thinks it's like, hey, this is a huge emergency, dude. It's like flooding out. And in my mind, being in the industry, I'm kind of like, it's a water leak. It's outside. No one's hurt.
Yeah.
Just shut the water off and we'll deal with it tomorrow. So, today it's a perfect example of like, the perception from the tenant is, dude, the sky's falling, like the world's going to end. And from the property management and owner perspective, it's like, no, this is an emergency, but it can wait till tomorrow.
Sure.
If we can get the water off. If we can't get the water off, we got to get somebody over there.
Right.
And
sometimes it's the reverse of that, where the landlord owner thinks it's an emergency.
Oh yeah, dude.
And the PM and the tenant are going, hey,
that's
it's
good. When the tenant's like, hey, there's like mold everywhere. Like, I don't know. It's all good. And the owner's like, what are you saying?
Get out of there.
It's like, it's been here for months.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that comes to mind to me is like, hey, what are the emergencies that I would get as a landlord? I have OnQ or another manager managing my property. What phone calls am I getting after business hours?
Okay.
Because if I'm not getting a call, that means that it stopped at the manager and they made a choice, whatever it is. If you're getting a call, then it's probably over an authorized limit, and it's health or safety related. It's a crime, crimes at the property, fire, flood, sewer backup, storm damage, something like that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that after hours thing, because there are times where there's things that come up that are an emergency, and the property manager might just hop right into it and handle it, and then inform the owner after the fact, the landlord.
Well, and it's kind of, I was just thinking this now that you're talking, it's like, if it happens during business hours, it doesn't feel like it's like emergency, all hands on deck, because it's like, no, we're here to do it. And we just do it as it could be a flood. And it's like, no, business as usual. We're going to get a plumber or restoration or insurance claim or whatever it is. Right. But when it happens after hours, that same thing could happen. And it's like, no, that's an emergency. I got to get people out of bed. I got to get a contractor that will go after hours. I have to talk to the owner who's on the East Coast, and it's already 9 p.m. It's midnight. They're not answering. I have to make a judgment call. Do I send somebody or not?
Yeah.
And so, we do a lot of training and a lot of checklists to go through to say, okay, what is an emergency? On the flip side, we have had emergencies that are like, hey, my fan looks like it's going to fall off the ceiling tonight. And we're just like, sorry, it's not an emergency where I can get somebody tonight.
Yeah. Turn the fan
off for the night, and we'll try and get there tomorrow. And it may be even a couple days. Like, there are things that have to prioritize ahead of you. If it's a wobbling ceiling fan versus a flooded basement,
right. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit from that landlord perspective. There are things especially as I look at like people online, like somebody will be upset, like there was an emergency and you guys didn't handle it. The landlord saying that, and then we'll do a little research and dig in. And was like, that wasn't, that was like a brick loose on the outside of the house. That's not an emergency, So what are some things that you think fall into this category where it's like, if you have a property management company, you should expect they would handle some of it before they even reach out to you.
Right. And some of it, I guess, is like routine processes in our office or other property management companies' offices. It's routine to us, but it could feel like an emergency.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times it takes years or multiple tenants or going through the cycle of move in, move out, a few times to realize like, oh, this happens every year, or this, not every year, but this happens every so often. It's no big deal. A classic one happens every month is like rent collection, and it's like, if like we're used to it, hey, we push to get them to pay obviously before any late fees or any 5-day notices or eviction notices go out. Like we're pushing.
Yeah. But
if a tenant pays 5 days late, sure, they're going to have the 5-day notice, certified letters, all that stuff, but it's not the end of the world. Like, it's like, oh, this happens. Like, it's part of the process.
There could be a million reasons that happen. It's not a delinquent tenant.
And a lot of times it is not, the tenant either forgot, or, hey, I was in the hospital this weekend, or, hey, we were on vacation and my husband thought I paid. I thought he paid.
Absolutely.
Whatever. Usually it's one of those type of things. But to the landlord, it's just, oh my gosh. Like, I can't believe they didn't pay. I wonder what's wrong. I wonder if they moved. I wonder if.
Yeah. And that's understandable. It feels like, this is their investment and they need that money. But like you said, we see this all the time. So we're going, okay, hang on. Let's get the story first before we.
And it's part of the reason we wait a few days. We're actually one of the fastest payers in Arizona that we know of, that collect rent right when it clears, we pay the owner.
Yeah.
Whereas, other companies may collect rent, pay all the bills all month, and then send it at the end of the month.
Sure.
We try and pay them as fast as possible, but some of that means that if they do pay 10 days late, they're getting their own separate statement after the fact.
Yeah.
They feel like, oh my gosh, the world's going to end. So obviously, if it's habitual, that can be an issue, but most of the time it's a one-off. So that's rent collection is one. I'd say so that's kind of a routine process within the office. Another one is routine maintenance. And so things like, getting your AC, what's the thing we do every summer? What's it called?
Tune-ups.
The tune-ups, getting your AC tune-up, where it's like, hey, I didn't have the money for that. And it's kind of like, hey, you should tune it up every year. Or, hey, a water heater goes out, completely dies, you have to replace it. And they're like, oh my gosh, emergency.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, that happens every 8
What did the tenant do to it? And it's like, well, it's 11 years old.
Yeah.
They didn't do anything.
We just replaced one that was from 1997. So it's got to be like, they set a picture of the sticker. And so it's like 26, 23, 26 years old. I can't do math. Yeah. 26 years old. And it's like, I'm kind of like, replace that, man. We got our life out of that. Yeah. Like I've got one rental.
We have employees in the office that are younger than that.
Yeah.
That water heater was older than our maintenance department.
No, my partner and I have a rental that has an AC unit that's from 1990. Still kicking, great splits. We just got it serviced, and it's like every year that goes by, we don't have to replace it. It's great.
Yeah.
But that's going to turn into, hey, that's routine. Every 15 to 20 years, you got to swap an AC. Sure. Every 5 to 10 to 15 years, you got to do a water heater. You have to do carpet and paint every few tenants. Like, it's not an emergency. It's not that you had to have an emergency like fund. You should have, that should just be in your budget. And so I think over time, owners of rentals are just educated and they understand like this is kind of how it is.
Yeah. I think one thing, and this comes down to that kind of, one-off or whatever kind of situation you're talking about, but there are situations where it's just miscommunication, where like a tenant gets a dog.
Yeah.
They get a puppy and they didn't realize that wasn't allowed in the lease. Like they didn't have one before, so they didn't even read through the pet specifics, and then they get a puppy and then we see it in a routine inspection and the landlord's like, what is happening? Get him out of there. It's an emergency. And it's like, hang on, like give them a chance to fix it.
And give them a notice and see if whatever they do. We had an irate, parent of a tenant come in yesterday, and it had to do with that same thing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, they didn't know they couldn't have a dog. And I'm like, oh, I understand that. But here's a copy of the lease. We do have to get the owner's permission. If you do, if they don't want one, they may give you a renewal, not give you a lease renewal or whatever. And it's really just talking through it. So it's, I'd say pets is another one that especially is like, I'm not a pet I don't have pets myself, but almost every one of my tenants has pets.
Yeah.
And so,
isn't it funny how people like us who don't have pets feel like an emergency?
Yeah.
Like, you let a dog in there? You let a cat in there? Are you crazy?
That is actually how I used to be, 100%.
Yeah.
And then I realized that I need to practice what I preach and let pets. I think we just signed on a property of ours, and I put the pet policy as like 2 small dogs, 1 cat.
Yeah.
And I like wrote it out, and I'm like, I've changed.
You've grown.
I've grown up. I'm learning the ways, to rent my property as fast as possible.
Yeah. So let's talk about for a second here, like the people you mentioned, the parent of the tenant coming in. Like, I think there is a tendency, like, landlords are removed. They're not living in that house, right? We're not living in that house.
Yep.
We're managing it, but there is a person living there. They're the resident. They're the tenant. And things might feel like, understandably, an emergency to them that, when you're looking at the broad scope of a portfolio or of just things that could go wrong, you're like, hey, this isn't a big deal. But you can't say that. How do you handle that situation when someone calls and says, the water heater's out, it's the end of the world? Yeah.
And so it is classic. And I was actually taught this by one of our clients recently, kind of reminded like, hey, this is what you have to do is you put yourself. So let's say, Ben, you're taking the call from the tenant, the resident at the property, and say, hey, my water heater's out. And the first thing that comes to my mind is like, dude, it's September in Arizona. The water is already hot because the ground is hot.
You can't even get a cold anyway.
There's no cold water here.
Yeah.
But, it's just not that big a deal. But you can't say that because maybe to them it is.
Yeah.
And it's not like, hey, I'm calling to report the water heater's out. It's like, it's out. You get over here right now.
Yeah.
So you have to like put yourself in their shoes. They've got all sorts of stuff going on in their lives. So put yourself in their shoes, right? But then you have to get off the phone and you got to call the owner and say, owner, this is what's going on. And the owner may think it's a big deal or not. Put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
And then you have to like wear both of their shoes and figure out what is the happy medium here. Does it need to be fixed? Absolutely. You are entitled to hot water. Is it going to go a long way if you prioritize that work order to get done today for the tenant?
Yeah.
Then get it done. If the tenant on the phone says, hey, the hot water's not out, but honestly, we're going out of town for a week. If you could just get it done while we're gone, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't have to prioritize that as high, right?
Yeah.
But if they're like, hey, I have visitors coming this weekend. We're going to have showers, 10 people showering here this weekend. Can we please get this done?
Yeah.
You tell that to the owner and you say, hey, let's give the tenant a solid and get this done fast. So it's having empathy is what I'm getting at is, this owner of ours was really helping and coaching us and saying, hey, look, just have empathy when you call me about this issue because this, and this. You guys don't realize that I'm going through this in my life and, the tenant's going through this, and put yourself in my shoes. It's not that I'm not willing to replace the water heater.
Yeah.
It's that the way you approached it was like, hey, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't, hey, Ben, here's what's going on. Our suggestion is this. What do you think?
Yeah.
It was, you're just doing this. And so we're constantly learning that as well. And it's tough to look at it from all perspectives.
Yeah.
Because the second you finish those 2 phone calls I just went through, you're going on to the next phone call, completely different resident, completely different owner.
Sure.
And they're going to handle the exact same maintenance issue.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Right? It's tough. I was talking to one of our property managers yesterday at lunch, and she was saying, you have to remember that person who just called you did not hear your last 3 phone calls.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like,
that's great advice.
I got 3 phone calls complaining that the AC wasn't working. Then this guy calls and says his water's lukewarm and not hot. Right.
And it's like,
but he doesn't know those calls. He doesn't want to hear like, hey buddy, your problems are nothing, cause it's like, I'm paying to live here. I deserve these things. And he absolutely does. So it's empathy is a perfect word, right?
Yeah,
you really gotta,
and it is hard. Like I was telling you, I don't know if it's this week or last week where my wife and our microwave just went out and it's like 12 years old. We weren't expecting it, but when it went out, it went dead. It wasn't like not working. It just like is completely dead. So as the owner of the house, totally different than when, if I was renting, it'd be like, hey, do you want to submit the work order? Do you want me to? My wife and I would decide who's submitting the work order and follow it through. Right.
Yeah.
When it's our own, we're like, I don't know. Do you want to go we could look this weekend? We could look today, tomorrow, whatever. It's no big deal. We can work around it because it's going to cost us money. We're like, whatever.
Yeah.
But you have to realize when it's the resident, they're like, no, I'm paying rent to have a microwave.
Yeah.
That is an emergency. I can't make my son's dino nuggets tonight.
Absolutely. Dude, I mean, listen, my kids live off of the microwave, and ours went out somewhat recently, and we had kind of the reverse situation where it wasn't a big deal to us because I just went and bought one from Costco, and I was like, whenever you get this thing fixed, I'll return this one. So don't worry about it, because it was like, oh, we got to get the one that matches the oven, and I was like, hey, take your time. I got a new one sitting on the counter. And it took them about 2 weeks, and that would have sucked if I didn't have that option. But I was like, hey, take your time. I'm not stressing about it.
And for us, it ended up being that as soon as we made the decision, it actually got installed within like 2 days.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't priority. It wasn't an emergency because we had control. But that's a homeowner living in a house that they own. They're spending the money on it.
Yeah.
The management company and a landlord need to understand there is a sort of entitlement, and that not in a negative sense, but an entitlement for residents. They're like, look, I'm paying good money to live here. I expect the appliances to work. Like, it's okay if it's not replaced for a couple of days, but get the wheels moving. Like, let's get on this.
It would be like, I mean, this is an analogy I thought of yesterday after we talked about this, but you go to a restaurant and you get your steak and it's cold. And you're like, hey, my steak's cold. And they go, hey, the last 3 people got uncooked steaks. So I'll get to you when it's like, I don't care. Like, I just bought a steak. I want it the way it's supposed to be.
No, it's so great.
And you have to really think of it that way of like, to that person, it doesn't matter what happened to the people before them.
Yeah.
They're not experiencing that. They're in a different moment. So I wanted to spend some time here, and obviously we don't want to make fun of anybody. We're not laughing at anybody's particular situation, but we have seen some pretty crazy emergencies come through here. And when I tell friends I work in property management, they're always kind of like, what's the craziest thing you've seen? Like, that's always the first question. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit for fun.
And there are some that we literally cannot mention because they're either privacy or it's just like, dude, that is so insane that
they can't leave this office. Everybody pretend you didn't see that.
and a lot of it is they're so sad too, like very sad situations. And just, you think of the craziest thing that could happen in a home, and then we find out a month later or something. We've seen it all, right?
Yeah.
And managing thousands and thousands of doors, it's like, it's just a numbers game. Like, it's gonna happen. You've got a sample size that's so big that you're gonna kind of do everything. But a classic one is every like 4th of July, New Year's, sometimes Labor Day, Memorial Day, we have firework issues. Like,
something burns down.
Like, we've had full houses burned down to the foundation.
Yeah.
We've had fires. We've had, but most of them start with, hey, we put the fireworks we thought were dead in the black barrel and it was next to the house, and it smoked all night and caught the house on fire.
Yeah.
That's happened in the last 12 years, like 3 or 4 times, houses burned down.
Yeah.
And it's just 4th of July. We've had classic recently in the last few days, crazy storms, right?
Just absolutely insane.
Just the monsoons that come through Arizona, man, they're crazy, and they'll knock down trees onto houses, onto cars, onto neighbors, and then the neighbors hate us because the tree fell down. Like, dude, I mean, you dealt with one forever.
This guy was just blowing us up online, and when I see that, I see a message. It was coming through Facebook, and I'm trying to figure out, who is this guy? What property manager do I send this to? We do not manage this property.
Yeah.
What is this guy talking about? Like, hey man, I'm sorry. We want to help. We don't manage your property. And he goes, I know you don't. You manage the one next to me. Their tree is blocking my driveway because it literally uprooted and just fell right there. And he's like, I can't get out of my house. And because of them, and the tenants next door didn't call it in because of them. It was like, well, that's not an emergency. It's not on my lawn. Like, not blocking my house.
Yeah, dude. So those are classic. And roof's been completely ripped off. We had one classic one that's like, you could Google this, is the Wig Bandit lived in one of our homes. And so he's a bank robber, robbed like 10 or 20 banks.
Yeah.
Ended up being a resident, not one of our screen tenants.
He was not on the lease. It's important to mention.
but like FBI raided the house.
Yeah.
And the owner called us because they're like, hey, I just got a call from the FBI who tracked me down. And they said they just kicked in the door and arrested the Wig Bandit. And the Wig Bandit was like a keyed term on the news prior to this.
Yeah, out here, hey, it was like a big deal.
We're looking for the Wig Bandit. Wears a wig into a bank and robs it, So, I mean, that type of emergency is super crazy, super nuts, like check fraud stuff, that had to do with his as well. We've had tenants pass away in homes of natural causes, like no foul play, no issues, but crazy emergency once you find out. And it's like, dude, the family doesn't even know. On-Q Property Management is the first to learn of these.
It's awful, but
it's awful. And so, but that would categorize under an emergency. Hey, what do you do? Like what issues arise from that? We had a car that rammed through the front of a house. It ran through a stop sign, drunk driver, and just went through a stop sign right into the front of a house. Car is in the living room.
And that's nobody's fault. I mean, not the tenant or the landlord or anybody.
Dude, and just imagine you wake up, you're asleep because it was in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
You're sleeping and you hear that in your house and you're like, what is going on? And there's literally a drunk driver and their car in your house.
Yeah.
Every time I see a house that's in front of like a T
or like a turn
on the road, I'm like, dude, that someday a car is going to get
my parents' house, the house I grew up in, right on a T, right? You pull into the neighborhood. If you go straight, you'll go right through. They have like 4 of the biggest, round, thickest palm trees you've ever seen in your life. Right there. It's a barrier. Literally, so you can't get a car pass into their house. These things are just like, I mean, they're probably 10 feet wide. They're massive. And
dude, that's so great.
Yeah, that protects their house because they knew that was going to happen. Like, so it's only a matter of time before somebody just blitzes through the front.
The classic, like floods and fires, there are too many to count. Like floods are crazy. One specific that was nuts was one had a basement and the leak was upstairs. And so it was leaking and the sub pump couldn't keep up with the leak. And so by the time they got home, it's 6 or 7 feet of water in the basement.
Oh my gosh.
Just completely destroyed. You know? And I think the pump probably was working, but it failed at some point. It was probably running all day.
Yeah.
Right? And it was just
too much.
Pumping and pumping and pumping. And it was too much. Recently we actually had a lightning strike. So we've had some of those light a house. And then, these are just the most, honestly, everyone we've mentioned is in the last year.
Yeah. And multiple times.
Yeah.
I wish we could say we only had one tenant pass away, but I mean, like you said, when you're managing thousands of doors, just the natural luck we've had, when we get a call from the police that are like, hey, we have a domestic violence issue or we have a crime that happened here. And it's like, okay, all hands on deck. What do we got to do? And a lot of it is letting the owners know, hey, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. Sorry. Like we have to let them out of the lease. Yeah. We have to let this person get away from this.
Yeah. Or whatever it is. Right. And so a lot of these emergencies are us educating the owners on here are the statutes, here are the laws, here are the issues. And we just have to take it from there.
Yeah. I wanted to mention one more. You wrote it down as gazebo gate, which I love. We had a guy
that's right.
A few years ago. He called the news. There was a story on the news that
3 on our side.
Yeah, a gazebo had flown into his yard. Like literally, this wooden gazebo is just plopped down in his yard, and it came from a property we managed in a crazy windstorm. It just caught the thing and lifted it up and put. We were aware of it. Friend of the pod, Ryan, was working on getting it removed, and. This is one of those situations. I get it from that guy's point of view. It's like, do this right now. Get this out of here.
Yeah.
But it's a giant wooden structure, and it took a couple days, and it was like, it's not an emergency per se.
I remember too, because we were trying to get a contractor, a handyman, or a service, or somebody to get out there, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, we can do it, but there's that storm went through. We have 100 trees booked ahead of you that are blocking traffic lights and
and houses that are actually destroyed. This is just
this is like a gazebo that it's probably not totaled but destroyed, and we're just going to kind of dismantle it and put it in the tenant's backyard. Non-emergency, dude.
But I get it. I understand his frustration, but it's also like you said, you just got to be like, hey man, look at
the silver lining is no one got hurt, man.
But he called the news, and we talked to the news, and I think, we told them, hey, we're aware of it and we're doing what we can. I mean, sometimes that's the best you can do, Nobody's hurt. Nothing's too damaged is good. So,
that's great.
All right. We'll leave it on Gazebo Gate then. And we will see you guys next time. Be sure to follow the show wherever you listen and leave us a 5-star review if you can. It really helps out.